The Taliban have declared that there will be no democracy in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, that they will rule strictly by the Islamic law of Sharia. While at least 50 countries in the world follow some form of Sharia law, it is the Taliban's interpretation of Sharia that has Afghans, especially Afghan women, fearing for their freedom. In its earlier Iftar, the Taliban banned women from going to school, going to work, showing off even their ankles, and venturing out without a male escort. Will Taliban 2.0 be any different?
Burqa or death? The choice is very real, as both have returned to Afghanistan with a vengeance. The Taliban are back, 20 years after they had been evicted from power. And the Afghan women had revealed their faces to breathe in the air of freedom. Taliban 2.0 is promising women their rights, but only within the framework of the Islamic Sharia law as interpreted by the Taliban.
Women will be afforded all their rights, whether it is in work or other activities, because women are a key part of society. And we are guaranteeing all their rights within the limits of Islam.
But so far, the reality has been quite different. Pictures of women at Kabul beauty salons have been painted over. While Taliban spokesperson appeared on television to be interviewed by a female presenter, women journalists across networks have been asked to stay at home.
मैं ऑफिस गई और जब मैं ऑफिस पहुंची उधर मुझसे कहा गया कि आपका जाना ऑफिस में अलाउड नहीं है। मैंने पूछा क्यों अलाउड नहीं है। उन्होंने कहा कि निजाम बदल गया है और आप इस दिन के बाद नहीं कर सकती, जॉब आप चेंज नहीं कर सकते।
I had a meeting with the new leader that he is from Taliban. They said for us now you might wait because we didn't decide that can a woman work or not in TV. So a few days you must be at home.
The former captain of the women's soccer team, Khalida Popal, has urged female players to burn their kits, delete their social media profiles and photos to protect themselves from the ruling regime.
I've been encouraging all these young women and girls in my country to be the voice for voiceless, to stand strong, to be bold, to be visible. Today, I'm calling them and telling them, take down their names, remove their identities, take down their photos for their safety. Even I'm telling them to burn down or get rid of your national team uniform. And that is painful for me.
In the 1990s, when the Taliban had been the masters of Afghanistan, there were strict rules that concerned anyone born a woman. The Taliban enforced their version of what they considered strict Sharia, or law according to Islam. Taliban's assault on women began almost immediately after they took power. They closed the women's university and forced all women to quit their jobs. There were floggings and execution of women on the streets of Kabul that had been filmed, and when these visuals reached the audiences outside, it brought out the horrific reality of what being an Afghan woman meant under the Taliban. Everything was banned. Women were treated worse than livestock. Girls in Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001 were banned from studying, banned from working, banned from leaving house without a male chaperone, banned from showing any skin in public, banned from healthcare, banned from politics, banned from speaking out to an audience. The punishment for breaking any of these rules was immediate and could be carried out by any Taliban official or fighter. Women were flogged on the spot if even an inch of her skin was seen. The same punishment if a girl was spotted trying to study, and if a woman was accused of adultery, she would be stoned then and there. An accusation of crime was often enough to call for the harshest punishment. Amnesty International listed an incident where a young girl's finger was chopped off because she wore nail polish. Under the Taliban, women disappeared in Afghanistan. Without rights, without freedom, without dignity, and without hope.
There are multiple things I want to talk about in this broadcast. What is the most likely interpretation of the Sharia law in Afghanistan under the Taliban regime? What will this mean for people who support or believe in the cause of the Taliban outside of Afghanistan? Will this lead to greater fundamentalism or radicalism as a result of the victory or the conquest of the Taliban? Joining us for perspective on this and more, I have with me on this broadcast Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner of India, author of the book Population Myth, Islam, Family Planning and Politics in India. We have Zeenat Shaukat Ali, founder, Director General of the World Institute of Islamic Studies for Dialogue. We have Wa.H. Muchalla, Senior Advocate, member of the All India Muslim Personal Law Board. Shukla Zadran joins us, Afghan Youth Representative to the United Nations. Munawwar Rana is with us, a well-known Indian poet. Some of his comments have landed him in a bit of a storm. I want to go across first to S.Y. Qureshi. Dr. Qureshi, can you set the context by explaining to people who are watching this broadcast what you think the most likely interpretation of the Sharia under Taliban 2.0 is going to be? Taliban 1.0 was a nightmare for the Afghan people, especially the women. Noses being chopped off, ears being chopped off, public hangings, some women even being shot. Taliban 2.0 is at least publicly putting up a facade of being more moderate, but they say they'll rule by Sharia. Will it be a more moderate version of Sharia? What should people really expect them to do?
Well, the fact that they said they will go by the framework of Islam or Sharia, in other words. I wrote an article in Indian Express this morning in which I spelled out what is the framework of Sharia. Sharia consists of four components, and the foremost of which is the Quran, and followed by the Hadith, which is the traditions of the Prophet, what he said and what he used to do. Besides that, in juris interpretation and the legal construction, these are the next two tiers. But the top two tiers are the fundamentals of Sharia. And I have quoted verses after verses from the Quran and Hadith after Hadith to show that the men and women were created equals. Repeatedly Allah is saying through various verses that we created you equal, men and women. And even the Quran Sharif is addressed to men and women equally. So categorically it says that we have created you equal. Therefore, we expect that if they are promised to follow the Sharia, this is the Sharia which I have, without my own comment, just the quotes from the Quran. I hope they know all that and they will follow what Sharia prescribes. The dignity, the equality in everything. In fact, to the extent that the individuality of a woman, even after marriage, she is not supposed to change her name to get subsumed under her husband's name. You know, that is the nuance and the beauty of equality and rights of women, which I think that they need to understand. I'm sure they do. They seem to be speaking a better language this time.
Shukla Zadran, you're in Kabul as Afghan youth representative. Are you hopeful that this time the Taliban will interpret the Sharia in a more moderate fashion? Or are you very apprehensive that the Taliban will, like they did in the late 90s when they were in power in your country, once again pick the most brutal, the most radical interpretation of the Sharia?
Thank you very much for having me. See, it seems like they are claiming that they will provide the necessary freedom and rights for women, but we should consider that they really need to avoid the international pressure by preventing women from their basic human rights. So, as you mentioned, that if we look into the past and we look into their previous regime, rationally there is very less hopes for Afghan women. We can't be so much positive when it comes to our rights and Taliban regime. But on the other hand, if we look into that they really need the legitimacy and international recognition, and to avoid the international pressure. So I think to some extent they have to try to protect women's rights.
How has life changed in Kabul under the Taliban regime? If you were to look back a few days ago under Ashraf Ghani's regime, and when you compare now for young women such as yourselves and for others, explain to our viewers, ma'am, how has life changed?
Few days ago, we were hopeful. We were planning for our future. We had a high moral, but nowadays nothing has left. Everything is gone, and we are living in a total unclear state. We don't know what's waiting for us in upcoming few days. We lost Republic, and we are now living under rule of Emirat. There is a power vacuum, and there is no political leadership. Not only women, but everyone prefer to stay indoors, and there is less crowd, there is less vibration as it used to be before. Life is like Kabul is totally silent, and everyone is just waiting that what is the upcoming events. More importantly, the recently world is witnessing that everyone is trying to leave. So actually a brain drain is happening right now in Afghanistan. Intellectuals, bright individuals are desperately trying to leave because they do not see a bright future for themselves here in Afghanistan. There is very less hope for them. So everyone is trying to leave, and everyone is trying to seek protection and security out of Afghanistan. So just imagine what kind of circumstances we are living.
No, we feel for you. I want to ask Zina Chaukat Ali, as the Director General of the World Institute of Islamic Studies, for dialogue. What you think the Taliban's likely interpretation of the Sharia is going to be? To say that, we'll go by the Sharia sounds very vague because it's not codified. There are 50 countries in the world which use some form of Sharia law, 8 of which are fully Sharia compliant, or where criminal and personal law is supposedly based on the Sharia. These include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Brunei, Afghanistan, Indonesia, Sudan, Pakistan, Nigeria and Qatar. Zina Chaukat Ali, what do you think the Taliban's interpretation of the Sharia is going to be?
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for inviting me to your show. The first thing that I'd like to say, looking at the track record of what the Talibans have been doing in the past, and I think, you see, the Sharia that they are talking about actually does not relate to Islam at all. Now, for example, if you say do not allow girls to go to school, or you do not allow girls to hold a position in politics, or you do not allow women to have an equal part in the social structure of a country, then how can you say that you're following Islamic law at all? Because the Sharia gives you all those permissions. As has been pointed out, the main source of the Sharia is the Quran. Then the second source is what you call the primary source, is the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. And then you have various other means, like there is qiyas, which is analogy, there is istisan, which is juristic preference, there is istidlal, which is logic or reason, and there is ijtihad. Ijtihad is creative reinterpretation. Now, I want you to go back into the penal laws of Islam, as has been pointed out by Maulana Maududi himself. He said that it's a big misnomer to say that there has been no changes, or there have, Islamic law has not undergone a process of evolution. Because if you look at the penal laws of Islam, they have been changed, because the actual law is that there is a punishment allotted for a certain crime, a punishment X. But as time goes on, the punishment changes. The punishment can change, but the crime itself remains, but the punishment can change. Here you have the Taliban stoning women. You have them, sexually abusing women. You have them looking down upon women, and women not participating in any actual activity. There's a governor, I believe, who has gone, who has disappeared and who's being looked for after the Taliban have come over. Now, this entire procedure does not belong to what I believe pure Sharia. Sharia means following, being just, giving balance, giving equilibrium to a society, and giving rights to its citizens. Now, for example, I would say that what Afghanistan needs, it must emerge as a model state that respects legitimate rights and freedom, upholds the cluster of the Charter of the United Nations, and respects international law. If they do not do this, then I do not know whether they're going to be acceptable, in the large world scenario. Now, that is something that the United Nations has to decide. But what I'm simply trying to point out, that you see this entire concept of Sharia, as I have studied it, in various countries. Now, you look at the Maghrebi countries, for example, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, their family laws itself have undergone tremendous amount of evolution. It doesn't mean that they're not following Sharia. It means that they are following Sharia. But as time goes on, they are interpreting.
Do you think that will happen, Mr. Muchalla, with the Taliban as well? That as time evolves, we're seeing some of that now in Saudi Arabia, where women are now finally allowed to drive cars, or in some cases go out without men escorting them. Will there be a moderation in the Taliban's understanding of Sharia, or will, when they say we'll go by Sharia, it sounds so vague and ambiguous, because it could literally mean anything in terms of how they wish to define it?
Thank you for inviting me for this program. I have absolutely no manner of doubt that they have to define what they mean by Sharia. The sooner they do it, the better it is. They cannot remain delightfully vague and say that everything has to be within the framework of Islam without defining what do they mean by the framework of Islam. One silver lining in this encircling gloom is the fact that they have got the experience of living and also interacting with the international community. So there is a little hope that they may not go back to the old ways, and the terrifying fear that the people are now feeling, because they have the terrifying memories of those 4 or 5 years or 6 years when they were in power. So that is very important for them. But they want a recognition in the international community, which they need it for the survival of the nation. They will have to take the liberal, and they have to go by the spirit of Islam.
But we don't know whether they will or not. Munawwar Rana, you've been in the eye of a storm since your comments about Taliban not being terrorists, but rather just being aggressive. And then you also said that, there are Talibanis in India as well, in our religions too. So now that the Taliban are in charge, given your understanding, sir, of Islam and the current situation, how do you think the Taliban are most likely to interpret the Sharia?
नहीं, आप ये बताएं कि हमने कब तालिबान की हिमायत की है, हमने कब तालिबान का सपोर्ट किया है, या तालिबान से हमारा क्या लेना देना। जाहिद तंग नज़र ने मुझे काफिर जाना, और काफिर ये समझता है मुसलमान हूँ मैं। मुसलमान हमसे नाराज रहते हैं इसलिए कि हम सच बोल देते हैं, और जो ये हमारे सो कॉल्ड हिंदू हैं वो भी हमसे नाराज हैं कि साहब हमने ये बोल दिया। तो हम एक शायर की हैसियत से सच बोलना चाहते हैं, लेकिन अफसोस की बात यह है कि दुनिया सच सुनने के लिए तैयार नहीं है। हमने जो बात कही थी वो ये कही थी कि अफगानिस्तान हजारों वर्ष से हिंदुस्तान का दोस्त है और हिंदुस्तान ने हमेशा उसका ख्याल किया। और यही नहीं, औरंगजेब के ज़माने में जब हिंदुस्तान की आबादी 10.5 करोड़ थी, उसमें अफगानिस्तान भी हिंदुस्तान का हिस्सा था, जैसे एक ज़माने में पाकिस्तान और बांग्लादेश हिंदुस्तान का हिस्सा हुआ करता था। तो हमेशा हिंदुस्तानियों ने, यानी यहाँ तक कि जो टैगोर साहब ने जो काबुली वाला नज्म लिखी जिस पर फिल्म बनी, तो अब इससे ज्यादा ऑनर और अफगानियों को क्या दिया जा सकता था। तो मेरा मकसद यही था कि हमारी सपोर्ट, हमारी हमदर्दी अफगानियों के साथ है। और जाहिर सी बात है कि और साथ में मैंने ये भी कहा कि जब 20 बरस तक जंगलों में, झाड़ियों में, बुरा तुरा की पहाड़ियों में और जब ये घूमे हैं, मारे फिरे हैं, तो मुमकिन है कि इनको होश आया हो कि इंसान को शहर में जंगली की तरह नहीं जीना चाहिए। तो मुमकिन है कि अल्लाह इनको सुधारे, भगवान इनको नेक रास्ता दिखाए। और अक्ल तो ठोकरें खाने के बाद ही आती है, ये एक आम मुहावरा है। मैंने उसी की सपोर्ट में कह लें कि इस सेंटेंस की सपोर्ट में मैंने ये बात कही कि जब भगवान आचार्य वाल्मीकि से रामायण लिखवाने जैसा काम ले सकता है, तो मुमकिन है कि ये भी इनको भी भगवान अकल दे कि इंसान की तरह शहर में हमें इंसान की तरह रहना चाहिए, जंगली की तरह नहीं रहना चाहिए। कुल राहुल साहब इतनी बात है। अब उसके अलग अलग अगर गोशे निकाल लिए जाएं, और मैंने जो बोला फिर मैं बोल रहा हूं।
Afghanistan's biggest female pop star Ariana Saeed escaped in the midst of the Taliban ruling Kabul. She was fearful for her life. Ariana fled on a US flight out of Kabul as the Taliban took control of the capital. Saeed, 36 years old, who had recently starred as a judge on a singing competition on Afghan television, had been a long-standing advocate of the Afghan army.
Ariana Saeed is a superstar in the country, known not just for her peppy songs and her infectious energy, but also for breaking stereotypes on what a woman can and cannot do in Afghanistan. Ariana is one of the fortunate few women who's made it out safe out of Afghanistan days after the Taliban takeover. The pop star posted this picture on social media on board an evacuation US aircraft on Wednesday, confirming that she was out of the country after what she called a couple of unforgettable nights. From Doha, Ariana continued to Turkey, where she resides full-time with husband Hasib Saeed, an Afghan music producer. Ariana's husband also shared a short video on Instagram on their flight to Turkey of the pop star fast asleep. Ariana is one of the lucky few women who've escaped Taliban rule and made it safely out. But there are still countless women who have no choice but to live a life of fear and trepidation of what's to come. The women of Afghanistan are scared today. It's been a long, arduous journey to claim basic rights after a regime that suppressed them, and now they fear it's back to square one. Bureau Report, India Today.
While several women in Afghanistan are living in fear, there are few who believe that standing up and raising their voice against the Taliban is the only thing to do. One woman was recently seen leading a protest in Afghanistan, challenging the Taliban, showing incredible courage, holding the Afghan flag on the streets in Kabul. Her images went viral. My colleague Pooja Shali spoke to Crystal Bayat, who took on the Taliban on the streets of Kabul.
Crystal, what is giving so much bravery and courage to young Afghans like you to come out on the streets in Kabul, in other cities as well, and protest while the brutal Taliban are taking over? Crystal.
Thank you. We wanted to show the Taliban and that Afghanistan and its people have changed. You all have to change, and you have to forget your extremist thoughts and beliefs. We are unavailable from our rights and freedoms. How long we should be afraid from Taliban? We have to face this group and see that they have changed. They have changed is another matter. But as I faced with them, the Taliban's not changed. Taliban are the Talibans of 1997 with a narrow mind.
So, when you decided to come out on the streets in Afghanistan, you were seen protesting. You had an Afghan flag in your hand. What are the risks involved presently for brave people like you there in the country who have decided to continue holding the Afghanistan flag in your hand and also come out on the streets and show a message there to the Taliban?
Well, as up to now, it's illegal that they are raising their group flag. That it's a group flag. It's not a national flag or our country's flag. We went to Tape Wazir Akbar Khan to raise our flag and our Independence Day and celebrate our independence. So they didn't allow us, though I was knowing that they might shoot on me. But I accept all these challenges and I went there and I talked with them face to face that we have this right. But unfortunately, they behave in such a way that they told me you're a woman, you are a lady, you have to stay at home.
Yes.
So I told them that we have the right to come out and we have to take part in all spheres of the society, and they said you're in a wrong way. So I didn't accept them, and then I continue, and we came on the streets and by giving slangs of Zindabad Afghanistan. So long life to Afghanistan. And unfortunately, we were on the way, and they shoot on us. So my
some of your friends, yes, did they receive injuries?
Yes, they received injuries, and they shoot it on us, and they came and they beat our driver very badly.
You know, that's Crystal Bayat, and I want to put this question to Shukla Zadran because we're seeing this pockets of resistance. Do you think this will build in the days to come? Will there be more young girls like Crystal Bayat standing up to the Taliban in the streets of Kabul, or do you think that's too much of a risk and not too many would want to do what Crystal did?
See, there are many girls and women who are willing to raise their voice, not only for them, but for everyone, for the entire Afghan nation and for Afghanistan. This is very much surprising, and this is, I think, not only taking the risk, but it's all. But we can say that it's making the history. I think the young Afghan generation has changed. They are bright, they are educated, they are well informed, and they will face Taliban. They will not allow Taliban to do whatever they want to do, like their previous regime. I think despite all the risks, there are many Afghan women who are eager to physically face them, or through social media and through writing and sharing their opinion on social media platforms.
No, so when we have this big debate about the interpretation of the Sharia, Mr. Qureshi, the one difference between the Afghanistan which was ruled by the Taliban from 1996 till 2001 and now is that over the past 2 decades, people like Shukla Zadran, people like Crystal Bayat and others have seen freedom. They've smelt what being in a republic feels like, and therefore does it then make the task of the Taliban to subjugate Crystal Bayat, Shukla Zadran and other young women become that much tougher? Because you see this young girl, she's out on the streets holding placards, standing up to armed militia holding guns.
Yeah, Rahul, I think there are two ways of looking at this. One, that the girls have tasted freedom, but what freedom? A few bullets and the freedom will be gone. So it probably also shows that in 20 years, Taliban have also learned and they've moderated a bit. And that is our fervent hope that is the case. Otherwise, for some girl to go out onto the street and face all these armed, super armed Taliban and say that they got away with it. It might be a bit of a bravado. And that is something I'm scared of. And I think they should lie low a bit. And let's see how the things show. But the official statement of Taliban spokesman has been that they will allow women to work equally in office, which is a good thing, which is what we are looking forward to.
Heartbreaking scenes continue to emerge out of Kabul airport, where desperate Afghans are lining up to flee the Taliban. Images of parents flinging their newborn children over barbed wires, gunshots reverberating as American troops fired in the air to disperse the crowds. Naveed Sultani captures the scenes of despair at the Hamid Karzai airport exclusively for India Today.
Desperate parents flinging their wailing infant over a barbed wire. As shots are fired to disperse the crowd. These are the images of horror unfolding in the Afghan capital of Kabul. All these people want is to escape. The Kabul airport is flooded with Afghans looking for any way to reach out to the American forces who are in control of the flights right now. The US soldiers are resorting to firing in the air, resulting in absolute pandemonium.
I want to leave Afghanistan. Situation here is very difficult to live. I have small children. I want embassy to help me in leaving the country.
An Afghan army veteran is among those trying to leave Kabul.
I worked for peace for close to 20 years. But now I'm jobless and don't know what will happen.
Not just Jawar, women fear for their safety in wake of Taliban takeover and want a better life elsewhere.
I want education. I want to learn in my life and grow also. I want to live in peace and I'm tired of this country.
The sea of Afghans outside Kabul airport reflect the worst humanitarian crisis the world has witnessed in recent years. With Naveed Sultan from Kabul, Bureau Report, India Today.
You know, these scenes break my heart, Zina Chaukat Ali, of these young kids being flung across the barbed wires as Afghan parents think that the soldiers can take care of their children. I mean, just imagine the desperation. They think at least if they can't have a good future, you know, let there be a better future for their children. They're willing to give their newborn children, young toddlers, infants, away to these soldiers. Zina Chaukat Ali? I was talking about the desperation of these Afghan parents as they fling their children across the barbed wire in the hope that the soldiers can take care of their children and help them grow up. I mean, which parent? I mean, I'm a parent myself with two children. It's inconceivable for most people watching to think that somebody would be willing to give their children away, and such is the fear of the Sharia law, this interpretation of what the Taliban may do later.
I think, Rahul, I think that this entire regressive philosophy that has been practiced by them ever since from 1996 downwards, has to be very openly, I would like to condemn that kind of thinking. They are barbarics that are taking a country way behind time, into the dark ages, into the medieval time. There is this gender apartheid. Why would a woman with children run from her country? We have seen that plane that was going up. People have risked their lives to climb it. How many people have dropped down dead? Now, this is not the way in which you conduct. This is not Islam, please. This is anti-Islam. So there, I don't see, the Sharia law in its essence, in its spirit that is practiced. And I don't see any ijtihad. Ijtihad means creative reinterpretation. Even Saudi Arabia today has got its clerics. where women are now driving. There are a number of laws, and I must say that I salute the Prince Mohammed bin Salman for taking such a big step, and the clerics. But that means that there is room for change. But this kind of thinking, which is driving people away. You see, where we have seen, the application of dogmatics without reason, the application of dogmatics, in the name of Islam. I think and you see, education, which is this lady was just talking about, is an integral part of Islam. There are 805 verses in the Quran dealing with ilm and knowledge and its derivatives. The first revelation of the Quran has to do with read in the name of your Lord. The Prophet has said it is the religious duty of every man and woman to seek knowledge. Now you tell me, which Sharia is this? Are they following? And what is this interpretation that they're giving is way beyond me. And I'm quite horrified. I'm very, what shall I say? I'm very depressed that this kind of a thinking has to emerge, and this can successfully create Islamophobia.
Sure. You make an important point, because the Taliban, while on the one side they announced their support to women's rights and press freedom, it's clear there's a huge gap between words and actions. Media watchdogs are reporting incidents this week of Afghan journalists being beaten and harassed, and they don't see any respite in the days to come. Here's more.
Women's rights and free speech have been hard-fought gains in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades of war. When last in power in 2001, the Taliban had barred women from holding jobs, but in what would have been unthinkable back then, a female journalist interviewed a Taliban spokesperson earlier this week after the group secured power in the capital, Kabul. In their first press conference since capturing the city, the Islamist militant movement said Tuesday it would allow free media and jobs for women. But some journalists aren't convinced. Saad Mohseni, who heads the largest private broadcaster in Afghanistan, told Reuters on Thursday it's too early to tell what the Taliban's policies will be.
The laissez-faire approach is more a reflection of not having enough bandwidth than a specific policy that they would allow media to carry on business as usual, as they have been over the last 2 decades. So I wouldn't get too excited. It's only been 72 hours. I mean, since they took over the city, and it's just their senior officials are just arriving in Kabul, now.
A Taliban spokesperson said on Tuesday that media must not work against Islamic values and that women could work, quote, within the framework of Islam.
It's interesting that some of them are interviewed, they refuse to look at the woman, they look at the camera person. So it's they do it, but they do it in a way that you can see that they're uncomfortable. Whereas the guy in the studio the other day was sort of a senior, one of their senior outreach communications person, was quite comfortable looking at the presenter.
Media watchdogs have reported incidents this week of Afghan journalists being beaten, harassed, or raided at their homes. In one example, a presenter on state-owned Radio Television Afghanistan, Sahar Nasari, wrote on Facebook that members of the Taliban took his camera and beat up his colleague while he was trying to film a story in Kabul. He said, quote, "It has become clear there is a gap between action and words." A Taliban spokesperson did not respond to a request for comment on accusations that it has harassed journalists, and particularly women in the profession.
There's a huge gap between what they're saying and what they're doing. You can't trust the Taliban and take them at face value. We've been able to touch upon some important aspects of what the Sharia is, as is written in the Quran, and also what the Taliban's interpretation is and what's going on elsewhere. S.Y. Qureshi, Zinat Shaukat Ali, Y.H. Muchalla, Shukla Zadran and Munawwar Rana for joining me on the Newstrack. Thank you.